Good afternoon or good morning to you wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Timothy Burt and I have the privilege of being the Director Strategy and Planning at Future Skills Organisation. Welcome to the webinar for the release of our 2025 Workforce Plan, Pathways to Impact. I'd like to begin this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. For me, this is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So this afternoon, I'll start by just giving a couple of minutes of context, and then we will have a short presentation on the workforce plan, followed by a session with 4 wonderful panellists, and finally some time for Q&A. This report marks our 3rd of our workforce plans. This is the foundation document examining the state of the finance, technology and business industries. And this plan builds on our previous workforce plans, but has a much more future-focused view of the 2030 finance, tech and business workforce. And these workforce plans are key components underpinning and informing all of our projects, activities and initiatives that we undertake here at FSO. During the next hour, if you have any questions for the panellists or on the report itself or any of the data, please drop them in the chats. We do have somebody monitoring the chat. And as I said, we will have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar, which will be facilitated by Rachel Kerrigan, who is our workforce plan lead at FSO. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Rachel to talk us through the latest report's findings.
Thanks, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone. As Tim mentioned, I'm the Workforce Planning Lead at Future Skills, and I'm excited to introduce you to the 2025 Workforce Plan, Pathways to Impact. This plan really is my baby and one I'm proud to share because it takes a sharp, forward-looking lens to the finance, tech and business workforce we'll need for 2030 and beyond. This year's plan is quite different to any that we've launched before. For the first time, we've extended our projections beyond 2021 census, modelling our workforce outlook to 2024. We've also looked further ahead to 2030, not just in terms of workforce numbers, but through the lens of migration, education, attrition and job movement. We have also started to delve deeper into the journey of learners through education. It's a whole system view of what's needed to actually start closing the gap. Next slide, please, Katrina. So I want to start by explaining how we frame the workforce in this plan, because you'll hear us talk both about the industry view and an occupational view of the workforce, and that's deliberate and essential. The industry or the vertical view looks at what's happening inside finance, tech and business sectors, those core organisations delivering services. The occupation or horizontal view cuts across the whole economy. It shows where finance, tech and business roles exist, even if they're in other industries such as healthcare, construction or education. So if you take finance professionals, for example, they don't just work in banks. They're found across every sector. And that's why you'll see the numbers between the industry and the occupations look different. So it just depends on what lens you're looking at. And that's also why we need both perspectives to make sure that we're making sound system-wide decisions. Next slide, please, Katrina. By 2030, Australia will need around 3.5 million skilled workers across finance, tech and business. That's an increase of nearly 450,000 roles from today. But on our current path, we're not going to get there. Across the economy, we're facing a projected shortfall of nearly 250,000 workers by 2030. And even more concerning, the skills shortage is 20% larger than the workforce gap. Demand is rising at 2.2% per year, but workforce supply is not keeping pace. Attrition will see more than 613,000 roles exit by 2030. And even with the contributions from migration, education and job movements, it's not enough. This isn't just a talent shortage, it's a system that's actually under pressure. Thousands of roles are going to be unfilled, innovation is stalling, and too many people still can't see clear supported pathways into these careers. That's why our plan is built around 4 priorities: to strengthen skills-based pathways into jobs, not just qualifications, to embed digital capability at every level, to deliver learner-centred education that's flexible and job-aligned, and to treat diversity as a strategy, not just a metric. These are all levers that we can all use going forward, so that we can go from insights to actually making some real impact. Next slide, please, Katrina. All right, let's talk about finance. By 2030, the sector is forecast to fall short by about 64,000 workers economy-wide. Within the finance industry itself, the gap is around 25,000. And critically, the workforce supply is projected to flatline over the next 5 years. This is being driven by high attrition, especially in foundational roles like bookkeepers and accounting clerks, an ageing workforce where 16% of finance workers are over 55, and a shrinking domestic pipeline, particularly in accounting. In fact, nearly half of all accounting enrolments are now international, and 16% of professionals in the field began on student visas. That leaves us exposed, especially as global competition for talent ramps up. On a positive note, though, vet enrolments in financial services are the highest they've been since 2018. It's a pathway with real potential and one we need to invest in and scale. But when we talk about finance, we need to talk about the shape of the future workforce. Finance is changing rapidly. ESG reporting, AI-enabled services, insurtech, fintech, they're all transforming the sector. And we need to build a hybrid workforce that's technically strong, digitally fluent, and ready to lead transformation. That means reversing domestic enrolment declines, strengthening vet to employment pathways, supporting international graduate transitions, and most importantly, repositioning finance as a strategic and future-facing career. Next slide, please, Katrina. In tech, the challenge is even sharper. By 2030, we're expecting a shortfall of around 131,000 tech workers across the economy, and that's around 61,000 within the tech industry itself. And while demand is growing, there are still clear gaps in our training to employment pipeline. IT degrees have the highest attrition across the sector. It's actually 6 to 7 points higher than the tertiary average. Also lower than the tertiary average is that 74% of domestic IT grads secure full-time work within 4 months. And while vet enrolments have increased, outcomes are remaining inconsistent, with many graduates not transitioning into roles that are actually aligned with their training, which is telling us that the system isn't translating the training that we have into actual jobs. Migration is carrying a lot of the load. 41% of tech roles are held by migrants, but without growing domestic capability, that won't be sustainable long term. We also have a geographic gap in tech. Only 10% of the tech roles are based outside of major cities, and there's a huge opportunity to build on regional capability. This isn't just a tech sector problem, though. It's a national workforce challenge with economic, innovation, and security implications. So we need to boost completion rates in priority qualifications, better map pathways to job, maintain strong migration pipelines while domestic supply builds, and invest in generalist and specialist capabilities in areas such as cyber, AI, and computer science. Next slide, please, Katrina. The business workforce is large and complex, and it's changing fast. We're expecting a shortfall of 48,000 workers by 2030, but unlike finance and tech, some business occupations, especially in admin, are in decline due to augmentation and automation within these roles. So workforce planning here means doing two things: managing a decline in some of the roles while reskilling and redirecting talent into others. This sector also has the oldest workforce profile across finance, tech, and business, with more than 20% aged over 55. That means targeted transition pathways and a robust talent pipeline are crucial for this sector. But where's the demand growing? Think about HR, compliance, consultants, legal marketing, all those roles that blend digital capability, leadership, and emotional intelligence. There's also a major opportunity in this sector in reskilling. Around 40% of the gap could be filled by transitioning existing workers from roles at risk into growth areas. And of course, when we're talking about business, we can't forget small business. They make up 97% of businesses in Australia, but often lack access to training, tech systems, or the support they need to adapt. If we want a resilient business workforce, we need to design for them too. Next slide, please, Katrina. So, how do we actually turn all these insights into action? This year's plan outlines 6 strategic imperatives, a system-wide blueprint that connects education, government, and industry around what's needed. We need to define clear employment pathways, and this means designing clear modular pathways that reflect real job opportunities, especially for career changes and mature learners. And this needs to be supported by a real understanding of how entry-level roles are changing and how structured reskilling routes can take place. We need to build finance, tech, and business capability across the economy. These are no longer niche skills. They underpin every single industry, from ESG to cyber. FTB skills are essential across the whole economy. We need to support our trainers and educators. New vet outcome standards from 2025 will actually raise the bar. Trainers need upskilling, professional development, and support to teach future-ready content. We need to ensure that training is aligned to industry needs. We're actually working with reforming qualifications across finance, tech, and business by modernising learning to match real jobs and removing outdated content. We need to deliver in-demand and transferable skills. When I say this, you think critical thinking, cyber literacy, AI, systems thinking. These capabilities need to be built into all training and not just into tech programs. And we need to actually scale what works. There's earn while you learn models, micro-credentials, and regional training hubs that already deliver really strong outcomes. Now it's about coordinating and scaling what works so that we stop duplicating and start transforming. We're also looking at some of those persistent gaps. Women are now just 30% of the tech workforce, and First Nations people and people with disabilities still remain only around 1% of the workforce. And this isn't an inequity issue. It's actually an untapped workforce potential. Diversity shouldn't be optional in our sector. It's a core workforce strategy. To have a look at the work we're doing in this space or to become involved, please visit our projects page on the website. The next phase of the work will explore key questions that have emerged throughout this year's analysis and stakeholder feedback. Some examples being, how do we better support regional growth opportunities in finance, tech and business? What emerging skills are needed, especially in areas like fintech, cybersecurity, AI, ESG, legal tech, all those sort of roles that we don't even know exist yet. What are the current training models that still where are current training models still lagging behind real-world workforce shifts, and how can we close that gap faster? And how do we better connect job seekers with clear, supported entry points into high-demand roles, especially in mid-career transitions? And finally, how do we better support SMEs in workforce development? These are just some of the questions that will guide our engagement and research heading into 2026, and we want you to co-create the answers with us. So now is the time to explore, engage, and contribute. You can download the full workforce plan at the end of the webinar. I encourage you to dive into the interactive dashboard and to give us feedback on what's useful, what's missing, and where we need to go deeper. I just want to give our dashboard a plug. It's a powerful new tool we've got. It's designed to help you tailor your insights to your region, your workforce, and your learners, so it's quite exciting. And when used together with the plan, and please use it with the plan, it actually gives you a complete picture, both the narrative and the numbers. And this is how all of us can shift from planning to real impact and from insight to action. I'd like to hand it back over to you, Tim, so we can hear from our incredible panellists.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. A sobering summary, but also lots of opportunity and lots of initiatives and other projects that are out there that we can scale on to address these challenges that are already working. So a really fantastic piece of work. And again, do encourage you to put your questions into the chat if you have any. We do have time at the end. And also, again, encourage you to interact, read our report, and also with the data dashboards. And, we're keen for your feedback and insights into where you'd like us to go next. With that, I am delighted to introduce our panelists for today. So I will start with Liam Dillon, Economist at the Committee for Economic Development Australia, or CEDA. Liam delivers applied economic research on Australia's energy transition, labour markets and productivity, and co-authored the report last year, Learning Curve, Why Australia Needs a Training Boost. On national training trends. He's previously worked at the Grattan Institute and the Victorian Parliamentary Budget Office. Next, we have Shailan Patel, Education Manager at MYOB. Shailan brings a diverse background in recruitment, event sales, media and advertising, and since 2015, he's led MYOB's education channel across Australia and New Zealand, working to bridge the gap between learning and employment. He also serves as board co-chair of New Zealand Association of Graduate Employers, which support best practices in early talent, recruitment and development. Next, we have Jodie Phillips, Strategic Advisor at Amazon Web Services. Jodie spent 16 years as a Signal Corps officer in the Australian Army before moving into defence tech and joining AWS in 2018. Jody now leads strategy to support state and local governments in the digital economy and is on various boards and advisory groups, including AIIA Queensland and the University of Queensland Press. And Jody is also the co-chair of our very own Strategic Advisory Committee. And finally, Peita Davis, Director of Skills, Education and Research at the Business Council of Australia, where Peita leads skills policy design and advocacy representing the business community. Peita has extensive public and private sector experience, including as an advisor to a former Prime Minister. Peita serves on a federal steering group addressing vet workforce challenges and is an employer representative director on our board. So welcome to all the panelists. As Rachel mentioned, we do have this exciting new tool, the data dashboard. So we'll be sort of flicking into that to give a few insights and asking some questions based on that. But Liam from CEDA, I'll start with you. As you can see, or as you've just heard from Rachel, we're projecting a potential shortfall of almost 250,000 skilled finance, tech and business workers by 2030. Australia's productivity, which is, on top of everybody's lips at the moment, is already stagnant. So what's the big picture risk here if we don't sort of better align workforce supply with potential future demand? Liam.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks, Rachel, as well for that presentation. I think, Tim, you're right to point to the productivity challenge. It is on everyone's lips, but that sort of belies how important of a theme that it is. And I think that these findings, pose challenges to both our productivity and international competitiveness if they do come to pass. The reason for that is because at a macro level, the inability to get the right people into the right job at the right time is what we call matching efficiency, and that can have significant flow-on effects. So you can imagine for businesses that have vacancies unfilled, or if they have workers in roles or they've hired workers that are perhaps unsuited to their roles, that can make them question investment decisions, their business expansion plans. And those things, rolled up at an economy level, really support economic growth, productivity, and in the long term, living standards. I think it was also interesting to note the shortages in technology and finance. Those can have significant impacts as well when we think about the diffusion of new technologies, new processes that are often championed by the technology professionals in our businesses, and not just big businesses like the Telstras or the big white collar businesses, but the small businesses, as you rightly point out, in the finance sector. So just the ability to meet those reporting requirements and publish high quality financial information has flow-on effects for the robustness of our investment landscape more generally, which all of us are exposed to through our superannuation profiles. So those are a couple of the very high level implications. But when you think about anytime there's a scarcity of an input, the price for that input will go up, and the same is true for workers, and that can flow through to the price of things we all consume, including services. And this has been one of the key considerations for the Reserve Bank as it's been thinking about monetary policy decisions over the past couple of years, which is how much of that labour market tightness we saw from, the onset of COVID has translated into wage pressures. But when you think about it from a business perspective, when that labour becomes more expensive, they start thinking about how to enhance the labour that they do have. And that can be done through new processes, upskilling, training, or giving workers new tools to do their jobs more effectively, maybe through AI. And this is sort of what economists call capital deepening. So in some ways, these shortages could also act as an accelerant to the diffusion of new technologies like artificial intelligence.
Excellent. You mentioned sort of upskilling and reskilling the workforce, and that was one of the key themes that came out of the plan, as you just heard. You co-authored a report in November last year, which found that the rate of participation in work-related training had declined by 14% since 2007. And yet we are hearing this sort of lifelong learning and constant upskilling need as jobs and tasks change. How do we turn around that decline? What's the solution here?
Yeah, it's a really puzzling finding that we made, because what we also saw was that participation in trainings was associated with pay that increased by around 20% the year following training, which suggests that businesses are gaining enough through providing that training and having their employers participate in it to be able to finance some of those wage increases. So it's troubling to see that decline in training participation despite the win-wins for both businesses and workers. It's not an easy problem to solve, and a holistic approach is what's needed. And some of that has to come from business, and some of that has to come from government. From the business side of things, what we found was that businesses really need to enable a culture that facilitates training. Unsurprisingly, what we heard was that time is a significant and the leading barrier to participating in training. I think many of us can appreciate that. Just finding the time in the day to do that sort of training is often very challenging, but we do need to make time for it. But relatedly, measuring the return on the investment that we make in that training is really important. And what we found was that only around 15% of organizations had some sort of framework in place where they were able to actually measure the benefit that they were getting from training. That makes it really difficult to, one, have a business case for spending that time doing training, and then secondly, also making sure that budget is set aside for it when there are those competing priorities for dollars within the business. And then finally as well, making sure that it's not crowded out by compliance training. Compliance training does have an important role to play in businesses, but getting that balance right and making sure that, you know, when it gets to the end of financial year and we're all scrambling to get through our compliance training, that's not coming at the cost of the other training that we can really get that value to our careers and to the economy from. From a government perspective, I really like the emphasis you place on lifelong learning, and the emphasis on the entire life cycle is appropriate. What we found was that the sort of downward trend in foundation skills is having a really material impact on training participation. So what our research showed was that people with higher reading and math skills were around twice as likely to participate in work-related training in their careers. So getting those sort of foundational skills right at the outset can really have flow-through benefits and impacts across people's careers. Secondly, better accreditation. What we see is that a lack of accreditation of work-related training means that oftentimes workers will have to repeat training that they've already done, and you can imagine the economic drag that comes from that. And then finally, just getting a better understanding and expanding of some of the programs that we're already investigating, like a national skills passport, where we can get visibility of the training that people have done. Those systems have been adopted in countries like Singapore, the Netherlands, and the US that sort of support the portability of training among workplaces.
Excellent. Thank you, Liam. And that is very consistent with a lot of what we found in the plan, and also a lot of our activities, particularly around sort of what we call the generalist skills and the importance of generalist skills, as well as, you know, the segue around the sort of the compliance training and the regulatory environment. So with that, Shailan, obviously you will be fully across and aware of all the regulatory changes occurring in the finance industry. So our research suggests that Australia is facing this potential shortfall of around 60,000 finance professionals by 2030. And so compounding that, you know, the skills mismatch that we've talked about, the impact of emerging technologies, these evolving regulatory requirements that we're seeing. From MYOB's perspective, what sort of blend of strategies do you think is going to be most effective in building a resilient, future-ready finance workforce?
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Tim, and great to be here and see so many on the call. But, you know, said it a few times, and I'm sure everyone will agree, it takes a village. So it's not just one stakeholder that will be able to solve this issue that the finance profession is facing. And collectively, how can we work together? So obviously, it's great to see what Future Skills Organisation are doing and why MYOB is very much involved and wanting to be involved in this. But then it comes down to not only the government and agencies like this, but also the profession itself, the industry bodies. How do they work to support all stakeholders? We're not an accounting business. Yes, that is our software that we provide. But again, we have a part to play. We partner with so many accountants and bookkeepers, higher education, but even going to high schools and then educating the parents. They're involved in their day-to-day work, but doesn't necessarily always translate what is happening in their workplace to what then they're advising their children and the potential career paths they can go. So collectively, obviously higher level, everyone needs to play their part. And I've been very fortunate in the last 10 years with MYOB to be able to do that and implement some of the strategies from not only an MYOB perspective, but in terms of how do we help engage and develop that next generation of accountants, bookkeepers, business owners, business decision makers, or tech professionals. And so we've worked very closely with institutions across Australia, New Zealand, high school up, to be able to provide access to our software. How can we incorporate that into the curriculum? And again, hopefully there's other people on the call here, other different types of software or products or services that can engage with educators to get that in front of those students wanting to continue down that career path. So you learn the theory, accounting 101, and then obviously our software is there so they can apply that. So when they are entering the workforce, they have had some sort of exposure. To what extent may vary in terms of what they would potentially be using, so that when they enter the workforce, then they do have that knowledge, and also help them put into practice, obviously, what they're learning. And so providing those resources, thankfully, our business does support that it's free, but again, doesn't always necessarily need to be the case. But very much industry, education, collaboration, and that can come in a number of different forms, as I mentioned, our software, but it could be very simple as the odd guest lecture, guest presentation that industry can come into play. That could be facilitated by the company itself, the industry bodies, but then there's also other associations that education have. So again, MYOB, we're a corporate affiliate for TAFE Directors Australia. We see the benefit in that, the opportunity then to engage with all the TAFEs. We're also part of the Accounting and Finance Association Australia and New Zealand, which is the leading body for accounting and finance lecturers across the two countries. So that, again, really helps us get across the education landscape. Who do we need to be in conversation with from the industry bodies, those types of associations from an education perspective, the institutions themselves, maybe it's the head of department, could be the lecturers themselves, because obviously they are big beasts in themselves. And sometimes it's difficult to navigate. From an industry perspective, where do I start? Who do I first need to connect with? So there's a few examples just there in terms of what can be done, but involves a number of stakeholders.
Excellent, thank you. And that is, that's very consistent with what we've reported in the plan. I've just got a quick follow-up question for you. You've talked a lot about kind of pathways into finance careers, and one of the key findings really is around the rigidity of entry-level pathways into lots of finance occupations, and this sort of higher education is the only pathway into lots of these occupations. How can we reimagine early entry pathways into finance to make them more accessible and have that kind of skills first focus that you've been talking about?
Well, something's going to have to be done, and obviously while we're all here today, and I know in particular industry bodies like Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand are looking at different pathways. I think the statistic, for example, in the UK, and what you alluded to, Tim, is about 40% of chartered accountants in the UK, only 37% go to university. So they have a lot more other opportunities for young people to become a CA. Whereas on this side of the world, it's university, and that's the only pathway or the predominant pathway. So what it does restrict people coming in. Even if I think about myself, I've worked for a number of years, different industries, but if I wanted to change and become an accountant tomorrow, it's probably going to cost me too much money and too much time to get there. But can the industry learn from other professions? So again, what with MYOB and what we've done to help with the technology side of the business is we will look at career changes. we will look at self-taught developers, or those that may have just gone to a boot camp for 6 months, as opposed to having a computer science or software engineering degree. Now, I know obviously it's a bit different. There's certain tax compliance and regulation that you need to be up to date with in that role compared to being a developer. But can we take some of the sort of principles from that? And it might not be as straightforward as that, but a diluted version to provide these pathways through, so that if tomorrow I decided I want to become a chartered accountant, the barriers to entry aren't as big as they are currently. Whereas I know tomorrow I could potentially become a software developer and go and teach myself. And so again, what are some of the learnings we can take? And I know there's issues within the tech space as well already highlighted, but what is happening elsewhere to plug some of these gaps that the finance profession can look to implement their own version of it?
Excellent. Thanks, Shailan, and a nice segue to Jodie Phillips to discuss tech. So, Jodie, as you've heard, the workforce plans forecast this, the demand for tech jobs is continued to grow over the next 5 years. And that's projected to outstrip supply by, as you can see there, around about 130,000 people. Further, this kind of skills mismatch exacerbates some of these shortages. So given what is happening in the tech sector, this rapidly evolving landscape that we're seeing, I'm sure you're asked this all the time, Jodie, but what are the most critical skills that you're seeing at AWS in your future workforce? What are the ones that you and potentially your customers can't sort of live without?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think it's really hard for anyone to predict the jobs of the future and a definitive list of the skills of the future, even tech creators. But I think what is certain that there's going to be a constant pace of state of change, the pace of change across all industries, because so much of that is underpinned by tech, is going to be quite rapid. We know that critical thinking and analysis skills will be key, as will really strong digital literacy skills, and the constant, as Liam spoke to, the constant need for upskilling. So I think the time of going to TAFE or to university and getting your qualification, then getting into the workforce and maybe going and doing a refresh as a postgrad, I think those days are over. So I think we need to accept the fact that there will be change, and the pace of both learners and employers to skill, upskill and reskill their staff will continue to increase, and that will place pressure on individuals and also on the workplace, because as Liam was talking to, it is a real struggle to find the time and also understand where the value in workforce skilling is, or workplace skilling is. But all of those things are going to be important moving into the future, into jobs that are underpinned by emerging technology.
Absolutely. So given what you said about this constant need, and that's one of the themes that I'm taking away so far, is this constant upskilling requirement for both employers and employees, and these fast changing skills needs that we're seeing. How do you see sort of accredited training keeping up? So vocational education training and higher ed, how does that going to keep up? You mentioned those days being over. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, when I say they're over, I think that traditional model.
Yes.
I think we've made a really good start with the Jobs and Skills Council. And again, as it was said, it takes a village. So I think having industry at the table with educational providers and educators to understand what are the future skill needs, how are they best delivered, what does really good integrated workplace integrated learning look like, and then also the role that industry has in making sure that our educators have the knowledge and skill to teach the content that's needed. That is a real challenge. I mean, we're seeing that challenge now, and we know that we can only skill through educators, because it doesn't matter how many sort of webinars or training we run. The educators, scaling with educators in the accredited and non-accredited space, are the only way that we're going to be able to scale that we need to.
Absolutely. And, we have been doing a vet workforce study that really reinforces that. Excellent call out, Jody. How do we support the educators? How do we bring them together with industry and make sure that they have that direct interaction? You also mentioned, the importance, obviously, of employers investing in their workforce. What's AWS doing to upskill its workforce, and what do you think is the risk for businesses that don't?
Look, I would say I'm very lucky. I work for a company. One of the leadership principles of the company is learn and be curious, and it's not just a catch cry. It's actually in the very fabric of the way that the company operates. So we have a lot of monthly and quarterly mandated technical and non-technical training, not compliance, but actual like leadership and growth type training. So and that's set aside time in our workday to actually undertake that training. Because, our company's future depends on having a skilled and technically competent and innovative workforce. But we're also given time, about once a quarter to go away and do personal growth and individual skilling in not necessarily things directly related to our job role, but things that are adjacent to our job role around our personal and professional growth. So I'm lucky I work in an environment where, that learning and continuous development is supported, and as I said, it's just part of the fabric of how a company operates. The threat, I think, we've all worked in organisations when the budget starts to get restricted, training is generally the first to go, and that's both commercial and in public sector. And I think the change is that employers can no longer see workforce skilling and training as a luxury. It is an absolute necessity for their survival moving to the future, because if they don't do it, they're simply going to get left behind. And workers will be looking for companies to work at companies that actually do support that, because not only will the company be left behind, the individual's left behind as well. So I think training is now just as much of a necessity as compliance training, paying your super, all those sort of things. It's just a cost of doing business.
Excellent, Jody. Couldn't agree with you more. Thanks for your insights there. Peita, last question for the panel. The modelling we've conducted points to this shortfall of about 250,000 finance, tech and business workers. What's the Business Council hearing from its members in response to these sorts of shortages? Are employers actively preparing for this talent gap, and what types of support are they seeking? Have we
You're
lost
on mute, Peita?
Peita, you're on mute.
Sorry, team, a little bit of technical difficulties there. How long have we all been doing this, and yet we still have issues? Maybe that's just me. Just a bit of background. Thank you so much, Tim. Setting up this webinar is really important, I think, to get that sort of whole of economy view of the problem, at least. So the BCA represents 130 of Australia's largest businesses. Many are ASX listed. So in many ways, they're better placed to sort of respond to this issue. But we're certainly hearing, that it is a challenge. So one of the key things that our businesses are really concerned with is that the system just isn't keeping pace with the requirements. So key issue is the training is just far too rigid and it's too slow to respond. Many courses aren't keeping pace with the technological changes, as sort of Jody alluded to. And the other issue is just the structure of the traditional structure of our education system. Many firms are looking for those short job-related short courses and micro-credentials, and they just don't exist, not in a way that is nationally recognised. And of course, the issue with having them not nationally recognised is it's really difficult for the learner to then take that qualification to the next job. There's also very few incentives for businesses to co-invest. So, as I mentioned, my members and large companies often build their own training pipelines, and Jody certainly mentioned that as well. But as the CEDA report identified, SMEs in particular face real cost and time barriers to do that. And right now, there's very few policy levers to really encourage industry-wide upskilling. So that's a huge issue. And of course, we know that the market signals are really lagging real world needs. So what that means is we just don't have the data to be able to react as quickly as we need to. So what do? How do we fix this? We need far more flexible training models. We've all been saying this for a long time, but now's the time to really move on this. We need a modern skill system that supports lifelong learning, has, micro-credentials built into the system, stackable learning so people can move between vet and university, industry-derived training, and, we're seeing some really great stuff with the IATs and the work that some great companies are doing there. But we also really need some support with the policy support around the collaboration. So businesses want to partner with vet and unis, but it's really hard and people often don't know where to start. It's a really complex system. We need the universal qualification system. We need to recognise industry design credentials, as I mentioned earlier, so that businesses can feel really confident investing in their staff. And finally, and I'll end here, we need better planning. We need to have a coordinated approach to workforce forecasting, clearer national priorities and consistent language on skills. And the great work that JSA is doing on the taxonomy might help this. And importantly, we need to improve our careers advice at schools. We need to better link what sort of jobs are being shown and explained to children in schools to better match what our actual economy needs going forward. So business is really ready to act, but we need a system that moves faster and all works together to really solve this problem.
Absolutely. Thanks, Peita. And just a quick call out to one of our activities that we're taking forward, which is the digital capability training product trial. Details on our website, and that is in response to this feedback that we are getting from industry that the system needs to be updated and more contemporary, delivering more contemporary skills the industry is looking for and being able to update training products more quickly. So if you're interested in more, there is further detail on our website, but also just a quick call out as well about the coordination across forecasting. Definitely we've based our methodology on the JSA Victoria University Employment Forecast Model. So there is sort of consistency in the way that we've constructed this methodology. Absolutely agree with you. So with that, I will hand over to Rachel, who's going to facilitate a quick Q&A with the panelists. So if you have any final questions, please do drop them into the chat. Rachel.
Thanks, Tim. We've had some really great questions in the chat, so thank you everyone for engaging and, really digging deep into the content we have. The first question I'd like to pose to Liam, and it was around the impact of emerging technologies is something that we obviously been talking about in the workforce plan, has been called out quite strongly. What policy shifts do you think are needed to actually boost Australia's productivity to ensure, we capture the full economic benefit of emerging tech here in Australia?
Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that this is one where there's a lot of nuance and you need a bit of a balanced approach. But what I would say in the first instance is that we can't close the door and get in our own way of emerging technologies as they come forward. And an example that I can think of here in the policy space is the risks associated with introducing maybe too much new regulation as new technologies emerge. And so we're thinking particularly about artificial intelligence. But what we need to make sure that we're doing and cautious of is that as these new technologies emerge, we're not sort of introducing new red tape in response to perceived new risks when maybe we already have the regulatory frameworks and approaches in place that can manage those risks. Thinking about sort of your consumer law here, if that sort of regulatory framework can adequately address the risks associated with those new technologies, then the preference should be to rely on those as opposed to introducing new regulation, which can get in the way of diffusion of new technologies, new methodologies that could boost productivity. There can be a tendency to think of more regulation as equating to more safety, but actually what it can also mean is more uncertainty, where in those previous regulatory frameworks, businesses have an understanding of how they apply to them and what their requirements are, and they can then apply those to new technologies accordingly. So I suppose that the overarching message here is making sure that we're leaving the door open to adopting those new technologies and not creating obstacles or barriers unnecessarily.
Yeah, great response. And that's one of the things that I suppose we're hearing is that people are, there is so much fragmentation around those policies and that at the moment. So we need to get sort of a little bit clearer on that. But as you said, allow people to actually be a little bit curious and not have it too structured that, you know, we can't tailor what we're doing within our businesses in a safe and ethical way. So thank you for that. We might move over to Shailan. I spoke a little bit about accounting, so we've had a few questions coming around that. Now, with accounting, we've heard everything from accounting is going to disappear because of AI to actually no, AI is making accounting sort of like a corridor to so many opportunities. If you go in and do it as a degree, you know, you're not going to just come out as an accountant. How are you seeing AI reshape those traditional entry-level roles, and what do you think this means for graduates in the future?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and I think accounting is definitely one of the industries where AI and accounting seem to be always in the same sentence. AI is another technology, just like so many have come before that. And if we think from an education perspective, many moons ago, you know, I wasn't allowed a calculator in class, you know, and now it's in your pocket along with every other technology that they can fit onto a phone as well as AI. So again, like any other technology, how can we embrace that? How can we incorporate that into the learning? It's being incorporated into the software. So students will have access to AI or AI-enabled software already. It's not new, and they are growing up with it. So again, how we can incorporate that, and then, you know, again, it does open up other issues that need to be managed, other challenges, but it's the same thing. So, you know, you couldn't have a calculator. You know, had to be closed book exam. Now everything's open book exam. So we've all gone through this, and it just seems to be that we're having to think about it a lot quicker than we have had in the past, given the rate of adoption. And with generative AI, other disruptive technologies may have taken years to get to 1 million users, 100 million users. With, you know, ChatGPT, it was months, if not weeks. So again, how it just means that we're sort of got to try to catch our breath and get up to speed a lot quicker. I think essentially, from an accounting perspective, the accountant using AI will replace the accountant that isn't. So it's not going to be AI that's going to replace accounting. And there's been so many studies, and, you know, in terms of the automation, etc., even things like MYOB when it came on board, what is that going to mean? But we work with accountants and bookkeepers. If they went, a big part of our business would go as well. So again, it's how do they utilize the technology to ultimately serve businesses across, you know, from an MYOB perspective, of Australia and New Zealand. And again, then it just comes back to, from an education perspective, all the different stakeholders working with educators, getting them up to speed with it. Peita made a great mention about the career advisors, 100% high schools, and many of these young professionals, or going to be young professionals, will be using this technology or some form of it before they even reach high school. You know, they're having tablets when they're in primary school. So again, how can we get it in early, incorporated, and upskill everyone along the way? But my first point when I started speaking, it's going to be a village, or take a village.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to speak to some accounting students recently, and they're actually really excited about what AI means for accounting moving forward. They're not actually fearful. They understand that it's actually going to change what their role's going to look like, but they're actually excited moving forward. So yeah, I totally agree with that there. Actually, on that AI theme, we might actually switch to Peita now. I know that the BCA just actually released a report on AI. Do you want to talk a little bit about that report and your findings around sort of AI and how it's, I suppose, affecting the employment pathways for entry-level graduates and roles in business?
Yeah, well, we probably don't go into that kind of level of granularity, but we certainly make some sort of high-level points that AI is absolutely going to reshape the economy, and it has huge opportunities for all of us, and of course some challenges, but we really do see this as a great way to uplift productivity and just really get the economy firing again. I think there will be a bit of a challenge, I think, in entry-level jobs. And this is where I think we need to get ahead of thinking about just how far we can take the reform of the education system, because the traditional go to uni, go to vet, move into an entry-level job, work your way up probably won't happen, or it might not happen as much, over the next sort of 10-year period, 20-year period, could be even shorter, who knows. So I think we put out this report as a bit of a call to action to say this is happening, it has huge potential, but we all need to reshape and rethink about the way that we're doing things, and training is a really important part of that. I don't think entry-level jobs will disappear, but that we'll have to sort of do perhaps more earn while you learn, and those sort of things. I think the point about the person who uses AI will be the one who is also employed is a really good one. I don't think not using AI is the option here.
Yeah, 100% agree. I heard a really good quote actually the other day that was, where the tech ends, the human begins. And that AI is actually going to amplify what we're best at instead of replace, what we don't, and replace what we don't need to do. So there's real opportunities if you actually reframe the way we think about AI and we're using AI. So yeah, awesome. Thank you. And just another plug for your report. Everyone go out and have a bit of a look at that if you want to learn a little bit more about it. Jody, we might sort of duck over to you. And this is obviously an AI theme. A lot of the questions that were coming through, this is a bit higher level. So with the increasing adoption of AI tech reshaping the balance between like labour and capital in Australia's tech industry, how do you see that shaping the future workforce investment within like tech industries and those entry-level pathways? Big question.
Yeah, it's multifaceted. Look, there's no doubt that there is. You would have seen the announcement. You may have seen the announcement from Amazon in the US 2 nights ago from the Prime Minister. There's huge investment by AWS, but multiple other AI providers into the Australian economy. So, and that is only going to increase over the next decade. So, and that the big question then is, how do we use that investment to drive productivity and to drive the digital economy? And so that sort of program of work is what we're working through now with state and federal government. So there's no point in investing if it's not going to be leveraged fully for the benefit of everyone. So there's no easy answer, because everyone is going to need to, we have a digital literacy issue first. You can't be a fantastic user of AI if you don't have at least a good baseline of digital literacy to start with. So that's number one problem. And then how do we build on that? And it's for all learners. It's for K-12, vocational, higher ed, all the way through then to workforce reskilling, upskilling. So there's no one answer for one cohort, and that I think that's what we need to work through with government and educational providers and teachers.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's not going to be a quick fix or a quick solution, and we really have to all work together if we're going to leverage AI and through the economy. So thank you so much, and just thank you to everyone for all the questions. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions and answers. I'll try to sort of get to some of those after the webinar today, but I just would like to thank our panellists for answering those questions, and hand back over to Tim to wrap us up.
Thanks, Rachel, and thank you, panellists. I'm sure you will agree that was an excellent and insightful session. So we're very grateful for your time and input. My 3 takeaways are To paraphrase Jody, it's an absolute necessity for businesses to upskill their workforce and workers to be invested in their own personal development. Secondly, the importance of partnerships. It takes a village, as Shailan said, and others echoed. We all are in this together. We all need to work together. And building on that, Peter's sort of comments around the willingness of business looking for those partnerships with the education system, thinking about how we leverage that at FSO, and how we support and facilitate those relationships going forward is something we're, very mindful of. So thank you to all the panelists, an excellent session. Just want to wrap up with a couple of thank yous. A huge thank you to the team for pulling this together. Look, this year's workforce plan has been a mammoth task. So there are 7 reports on our website, our new website. There are more to come. There are 4 data dashboards available for you to go and play with and interact with. There's obviously this webinar, there's a video, there's media releases, there's other comms as well. It's been a huge effort. So huge thank you to the team. Huge thank you to everybody outside FSO that supported us through this process over the last year. Please don't forget to download the report. There's a QR code there. Help us provide feedback, what you would like us to examine in more detail next year. Have a play with the data dashboards. Again, we're really looking for your feedback. So please jump on and engage with what we've pulled together. And obviously, before too long, we're going to be consulting on next year's workforce plan. So, we'd love your input. We'd love your thoughts on where to go. If you're interested, please reach out, become an FSO collaborator. We're really keen for your engagement and interest. So with that, thank you so much for attending. Thank you again to all the panelists, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoy reading our workforce plan. Thanks so much. Goodbye.
Thanks, FSO.